5 minutes, 5 Live. And today I'm super excited because I'm bringing in someone from the industry to talk to who I think will have insights that we could all benefit from. Right now, it seems like things are getting a little bit better. I mean, I'm an optimist at heart. And if you really recognize, we seem to be getting over the curve, or at least the curve is flattening all around the world. And we're starting to find new medications that seem to be working. Ivermectin now, an anti-parasitic drug. Granted, it's not been proven yet. There's been no clinical trials, but we're seeing evidence that that may work. New ways to treat patients in the ICU. We're starting to understand that better. So while we're clearly not out of the woods yet, we're starting to see some signs that things are more positive. And we're starting to talk about, when do we open up? When are we going to open up again? And that's why I really want to bring Mark in, because Mark Foley is the CEO of Revance. And as CEO of Revance, Mark has a lot of interest, was the CEO at Zeltiq. At that point, when he was at Zeltiq, he significantly grew that company. And there he is, Mark. I'm just giving an introduction to you.
Hey, Steve.
When Mark was CEO at Zeltiq, he significantly grew the company and was part of the acquisition. He helped sell it to Allergan for $2.5 billion. Congratulations, Mark. And Mark is really well known in our industry because he's been such a successful CEO. And he's been CEO now since October of 2019 at Revance. Revance is an exciting company because they have a filler and they have a product in the regulatory pipeline right now that's going through testing that is a neurotoxin or a neuromodulator. So I wanted to bring Mark on and ask him a little bit about how he sees the industry and their perspective of it, which is a little bit different than us as physicians, perhaps. Mark, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Appreciate you having me on. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly. It's great to have you.
Good stuff.
I mean, Mark, a lot's going on now. People may not know this, but Revance has a filler tioxane, which is a product that was used in that's CE approved in Europe, very popular in Europe. It's FDA approved here in the U.S. I know you have the rights to it, and you were planning on launching it this spring, but now those things have changed. So how has this COVID crisis affected Revance and its launch of tioxane, in addition to where you are with Daxi right now?
Well, great question, Steve. So maybe I'll step back and answer that. So the question is, how has the virus impacted sort of what we do? And I think there's two ways to answer that. There's an operational piece, and then there's a strategic piece. On the operational side of it, like most companies with the shelter in place, we've adapted and have figured out with technology how to adjust our in-person meetings to now web-based meetings. And certainly there's been some challenges with that. Our IT team's done an amazing job, but we've now hit our stride. I think we figured out how to also accommodate some of the unique working at home issues that have arisen, having to educate kids at home, loved ones at home. And so that's going pretty well. And it being a Silicon Valley based startup that's sort of scrappy and adaptable, I think we've embraced the technology. And I think we'll come out of this with ways to leverage it in much more efficient ways than what we would have had in the past. On the strategic side, you mentioned the Tioxane RHA line of HA fillers that we've licensed in. Our original plan was to launch it in Q2, but because of their shutdown as well and the inability to get product combined with practices not doing aesthetic treatments, we pushed the launch until Q3. We're in a good spot in that we hadn't expected to do a whole lot of revenue this year anyways. It was largely going to be a heavy sampling KOL engagement period of time for us. And then, as you mentioned, our Daxi botulinum toxin A, or Daxi for short, neuromodulator, is still on track for an approval November 25th of this year. So we've shifted things by about a quarter, but we still believe that the revenue opportunity is largely intact for us because we're not going to be hitting the market until this has reached some level of new normal. The other thing is we didn't have a large sales force already in place. We delayed the hiring of our 100-person sales force to coincide with the launch of the product. And so we're also fortunate in that we didn't have this large commercial spend in place that we're trying to have to figure out how to rationalize. And then the last piece of this is we're in a very fortunate cash position. We have over $500 million in cash. We have money into 2023. So we aren't forced making these decisions of how do we cut costs to try and get through to the other side of this before we can start executing. Matter of fact, we continue to hire. We've not furloughed anybody. We've not asked people to take cuts in their salary, largely because of the cash position that we're in and where we are in the life cycle. So we're excited to come out of this like everybody else, but we're in a pretty good position.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're really in a unique position because you don't have a sales force, you don't have revenue coming in.
Right.
And I'll tell you, I got some calls from people who are looking to have a job with you because I know you're hiring. And
right.
Wow,
Yeah.
a company be hiring in this time period is unusual.
Exactly.
All right, the second question I want to ask you, do you think this will change the aesthetic market?
Well, I think there's a couple of factors here. So first and foremost, I think everybody's anticipating some level of near-term recessionary impacts on the business. And so if you look back and you say, okay, how have aesthetics fared in prior economic downturns? That the most, I think recent one is the 2008, downturn and what happened there. We saw elective aesthetic procedures drop 20 to 30%. Facial injectables, the category that we in, were a lot more resilient because I think they've been more incorporated into regular routines, hair coloring, working out. So those were affected in sort of the, mid single digits to low double digits, and then they rebounded pretty quickly. So I think that's the near term, and we'll rebase, and there'll be no doubt some pressure on that side of it. I also think that the social distancing guidelines that are going to be implemented are going to force some focus on the part of the physicians in terms of how do they reorganize, how do they become more efficient, how do they manage the flow of patients. And that to me is a little less certain in terms of, is this something that people do for a period of time, could be an extended period of time, and then return to normal, or are there going to be some lasting impacts of the social distancing? And I think there'll probably be some efficiencies that are sustainable, and then something else that changes. But I think if you then take a step back and you say, okay, independent of what happens in the near term and independent of what happens with social distancing, what do we think overall is happening to aesthetics as a category? And I think this is the encouraging part. If you look at what has happened over time, where aesthetics moved from being a vanity play to a lifestyle play, and now you have millennials coming in that through social media have a much greater awareness and interest in engaging, men starting to come into the channel, people living longer and wanting to look the best version of themselves. Those are macro trends that I don't see changing. And so I think what's going to happen is physicians are going to have to figure out, in whatever the new normal is, how to take care of what is going to continue to be, in my mind, a growing aesthetic community and consumers who have interest. And I actually think through some of these digital technologies now, I mean, if you look at Zoom, for example, I don't know about you, but I sit in these Zoom meetings. I'm not used to looking myself in a Zoom meeting, And so now I think it's going to drive, almost like social media, a new wave of consumers that have a much greater focus and interest in trying to look their best. So I think that the growth trends are going to be there. How the physician community adapts to adjust to that demand, I think was TBD.
Yeah. So on a macro level, aesthetics is always here. It's going to continue to grow. We just have to figure out how to adapt to it in a new normal.
Right. Agree.
Okay. Question number 3. Does Revance have any interest or responsibility or plans to stimulate the aesthetic market for physicians and for consumers?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that we definitely feel not only is it as an obligation, but it's good business as well. So I think in this phase right now, we're very focused on engaging with KOLs such as yourself and some of our investigators to be a thought partner to sort of work through, okay, when you come back into the office, what are the things that you need to be thinking about that have changed, and how do you optimize? i.e., are you going to have people go through some sort of qualification process, either online or remotely, before they come into the office? Do you need to update your consents? What sort of protocols are you going to put in place? How do you adapt to what is likely going to be a bolus of patient interest in the front end, right? You got all these patients that are sitting at home right now who are used to getting their injections that can't, and then the people that are cycling in. And so right now we're trying to be a really good thought partner to help people strategically, and we're bringing resources from the outside to help stimulate really good dialogue in that community. So that's
what do you mean you're bringing in resources? Resources for who, and what kind of resources?
Yeah, so for this group of physicians that we're engaging with, so we're reaching out, for example, to some of the consulting firms that we work with, some of the financial experts in the market, folks that maybe are a little bit outside of the normal group of people that the physicians that can give yet another perspective, like a healthcare analyst that will just give, I think, a little bit more in terms of different data points and ways to think about things to stimulate really good discussion and dialogue there. Beyond that, I think that one of the things that drives the aesthetic market is innovation. And that's a great way to engage consumers and physicians. So if you look at it with our RHA filler line, this is the latest innovation in hyaluronic acid fillers to come along. And as you mentioned, it's a great filler. It's done incredibly well in Europe. It's sort of the latest and greatest in innovative HA technology. So we're going to be bringing that in. It's going to be a great way for us to engage and interact with physicians and consumers. And then if you kind of go to the end of the year and you look at daxibotulinum toxin A, or Daxi for short, a longer acting neuromodulator, we think that that's going to generate tremendous interest among consumers and physicians alike. And through that interest, we're able to spend money on consumer awareness advertising, in-office materials to drive a dialogue around aesthetics and what things are out there. So we're really excited to be part of, helping to grow the overall aesthetic community.
And when you say innovation, are you continuing with innovation as far as doing studies or even looking at new products or new devices maybe to bring on?
Absolutely. So, there's some skunk works that we have going on the R&D side, but if you look at the investment that we're making, so certainly on the aesthetic side, we have some additional trials that are being done in aesthetics, but also if you look at the therapeutic side of this, I know we're very aesthetic focused today, but we've invested in trials around cervical dystonia, upper limb spasticity, plantar fasciitis, and so we'll continue to invest both in terms of product innovation and then indication expansion as well.
Okay, great. So now your fourth question.
Right.
As a business guy and someone who's been incredibly successful as a CEO, 10 years from now, if you were teaching a business school class at Stanford Business School, what would be the lesson that we're going to learn from this COVID period of time?
Well, that's a good one. I guess I would say I don't know what that is yet, but what I think what it's going to pivot around, because there's so much that's going to be written and discussed, right? This is one of these pivotal moments in time that our kids and our kids' kids are all going to look back on and sort of, hey, you remember when the stock market crash of 29 or whatever. I think this is going to be sort of one of those moments that people are going to write about. But I think the interesting business school case on this is going to be the unintended or unexpected downstream effect. So today we all know that the travel industry has been disrupted and what's going to happen to his hotels and are people going to travel, but it's the next level down. So for example, when you pay for with your credit card, are you going to go to more contactless because you don't want to touch things? What are the other things that are going to come out of this whole thing that we've yet to see? And so I think that's going to be what I think the business school classes, and it's going to be, hey, whenever you see something that's disruptive like this, don't just look on the surface of the obvious. Go another layer or two down to look at what are the things that are going to change, not just in the near term, but are going to sustainably change us. And I'm not smart enough to know what those are, but I think that's kind of where the really interesting nuggets are going to lie, and where I think we're going to see some of these interesting business school cases.
Clearly, we have to recognize that expect the unexpected, and
Right.
that's a policy in business and in medicine, and I think we're clearly seeing that right now too.
Absolutely.
All right, final question, number 5. What do you miss most now that you're in isolation? And when you first get out of isolation, what are you going to do? What are you looking forward to doing?
Yeah, boy, I tell you. Well, I think it's easy to say the macro stuff. I mean, I think we're social creatures. I miss being with people. I miss being around. I miss being at Revance and all these other things. But I guess it's probably the simple things in life that you take for granted that are part of your routine. So, for me, it's a Starbucks coffee, right? I've got my routine. Yeah. I go in, I get my Starbucks coffee. There's some simple pleasure in that. So I'd probably say that, or getting a haircut, right? I need a haircut.
I'm with you.
I'm losing a little bit here, but I can't go get a haircut, right? So do I depend on my wife to cut it right, or do I kind of live with it? So I think it's the simple little things that we take for granted that I probably miss the most. But I will tell you the silver lining in this, and I feel almost guilty saying this, we've got 4 kids and we've had them home and we've been quarantined, and it's just been this sort of special moment in time where I know we're not going to get this again, and so we've really enjoyed that. So there's some positives too out of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique period in time, isn't it? I wrote an article last week called The COVID Commandments, about the 10 commandments of what we're getting out of this time period. And it's really unique the way we all had to take a pause and step back and, evaluate our lives and what we can live and what we cannot live without right now. So it's a great opportunity. All right, well, Mark, I super appreciate you being here with me and doing these 5 questions. I know that my colleagues and my friends are really interested to know how industry, what you're all thinking about, because we rely on you in some respects to bring these products to market. And I want to mention, I think this is a good time to mention how important the pharmaceutical industry has been to all this innovation, to all these medications that are being brought to the market quickly and rapidly. And I think they've really stepped up. And sometimes you guys get unfairly disparaged as a goal, but really people should recognize the benefit we have with a free market pharmaceutical companies.
I would agree with you, Steve, and I think there's understandable anxiety right now about the near term because there's real impact that this is having on folks. But one of the things hopefully we can bring is a little bit of a forward look, because innovation drives growth. There's no doubt about it. If you look across, auto industry. Look at Tesla coming in, right? And
Right.
so there's all these opportunities to drive growth, and we're excited and proud to be part of that. And as a partner, we're trying to figure out how do we continue to invest to make sure that we're growing with the overall market, bringing new solutions, creating more value, creating alternatives. And so appreciate you saying that. We feel fortunate to be part of the community, and it's a two-way street, right? The way that we win is we win together.
And we're all in this together. Everyone is. So,
right.
All right. Well, Mark, great seeing you, and hopefully I'll see you soon, and we can, share a handshake and not have to worry about it sometime soon. All right. Have a great afternoon. Thanks for being here, and I'm sure I'll catch up with you soon.
Hey, thank you so much, Steve. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Tomorrow I'll be back. I'm doing 5 questions tomorrow. Tomorrow's guest will be Alyssa Lask from Galderma, and we'll talk to her about Galderma and how they are going to approach the market moving forward. So it's really interesting to get perspective from those people who are on the industry side. Clearly, they're affected as well, differently than us as physicians, but they have a vested interest in making sure that aesthetics continues to move forward in a robust fashion, and it's good to get their thoughts too. So hope that you all have a great rest of your day in isolation, and we will check back with you soon. Bye.